Hi, and welcome to The Bridge. Thanks so much for tuning in. We are a Markham Community Church located in the Greater Toronto Area with a passion for helping you engage in an authentic, life-giving community. We would love to connect with you further. Please take a moment and check out our website, where you can find more information about our ministry. Well, we hope you're blessed by today's message.
So many great ingredients to the wonder of Christmas, right? The music, the lights, the wreaths, the trees. Picked up the tree yesterday. The special treats, the baking, and the distillery district. Looks pretty cool this time of year. Love going down there and walking amongst all that Christmas festivity. All of these things are great symbols of Christmas. One symbol that seems to capture or create even emotions at Christmas is the symbol of home, right? Home for the holidays. Movies made by it, there's songs written of it. So many people go through so much effort to prepare their homes for Christmas. So many people go through so much effort to actually get home for Christmas. I remember one year as a student, I was 20 years of age and I was in Calgary and I wanted to get back to Windsor, Ontario, where my family was all gathering for Christmas. And so the only mode of transportation I had was this. And so I hitchhiked all the way home from Calgary and made my way on Christmas Eve day. Sounds like a movie, doesn't it? On Christmas Eve day, I made my way home and got home for Christmas. And it was an awesome, awesome experience for me. But home is one of those symbols that can mean a multitude of things to different people. But when home is working right, it's a place of warmth, it's a place of security, it's a place of comfort, it's a place of acceptance and understanding and empathy, and hopefully lots and lots of laughter. Home is a place where there is nurture, and there's forgiveness, and there's healing, and there's growth. There's encouragement, there's hope, and there's love. This is what home is meant to be for us. Home is where we belong. It's where we belong. Moses was a leader that we read about in the Old Testament. He actually wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And Moses was a guy who was displaced. No doubt about it. He was displaced from his home. He was a guy who entered into the pain of his people. He was a guy who was called by God to lead his people back home, out of exile, back home. The Israelites, God's family, were without a home for some 400 years, exiled to Egypt. And God looked into their moment, and he spoke into Moses' heart. And he said, Moses, go into Egypt, and what I want you to do is to talk to Pharaoh, and I want you to lead my people home. And so Moses took that challenge from God, and he became that leader. Here's what he says about the issue of home. And he's speaking to the plight of his people. And he says this, he says, Lord, through all the generations, so 400 years, that's a lot of generations. He says, through all the generations, you have been our home. You have been our dwelling place. And he's speaking to the fact that for 400 years, the people of Israel had no place. They had no home. They were without. And what happened in their hearts was a fostering and an anchoring in God and God alone. And Moses is saying, look, God, you were the anchor of our souls. You were the place where we grew and developed. And it was only in you. And so Moses was a person who acknowledged the importance of God in these people. One person describes their own wilderness experience this way. They say it this way. They say, I am homesick for a place that I'm not sure even exists. I'm homesick for a place that I'm not sure even exists. And then they go on and they say, one where my heart is full and my soul is understood. That place is a person, and his name is God. Here at the Bridge, it's our plan, it's our purpose, and it's our priority through the Christmas season to bring glory to God. This is what we want to do this Christmas. If I took you over to John 17, you would see that Jesus says, God, I brought you glory by way of revealing you to people. We bring God glory when we introduce him to people. This is how we do it. And so here at the Bridge, our calling as a church, our calling as a people is to introduce or facilitate connections with God all throughout the Christmas season. To join in the purpose of Christmas in the first place, and that is Jesus being willing to leave his home and come to humanity and lead us back home. Once we've found our home in Christ, we need to point the way for others to help find their way back home as well. Home is where the heart is, but home is God. That's the truth. God is the place where human hearts can thrive. We want to address this homing instinct that every human being has. And I think in a sense that all of us have a homesick for a place that they have not yet been to. A place called heaven. We've been built for heaven. And God has essentially wired us with this homing device called our soul, where we long to be in that place. And God has set eternity in our hearts, Solomon says. He has set heaven within our hearts. We all long and desire for it. C.S. Lewis summed it up well when he talked about the longing for someplace else. We all have it. All the things that have ever deeply possessed your soul have just been small hints towards what could and will be in God. Now, the Apostle Paul, he addresses this issue of home as well. He says, we know that when these bodies of ours, these physical things called tents, are taken down and folded away, they will be replaced by resurrection bodies in heaven, God-made, not handmade, and we'll never have to relocate our tents again. Sometimes we can hardly wait to move, he says, and we cry out in our human frustration. Compared to what's coming, living conditions here, around here, seem like but a stopover in an unfurnished shack, and we're tired of it. We've been given a glimpse of the real thing, of our true home, Paul says, our resurrection bodies. The Spirit of God whets our appetite by giving us a taste of what is ahead. He puts a little bit of heaven in our hearts so that we'll never settle for less. That's why we live with such good cheer. That's why we celebrate Christmas. Paul goes on to say, you won't see us drooping our heads or dragging our feet. Cramped conditions here on earth will not get us down. They only remind us of the spacious living conditions that are ahead. It's what we trust in but don't yet see that keeps us going day in and day out. Do you suppose a few ruts in the road or rocks in the path are going to stop us? When the time comes, we'll be plenty ready to exchange this exile for our homecoming. That is such a beautiful scripture of hope for every one of us. And the Bible tells the story, of course, of the prodigal son. I mean, that young man who leaves his home, leaves the embrace of his father, thinking that there's something else out there, right? And he's out there experiencing that something else, and it leaves his heart dry. It leaves his soul unmoored. And it's in the midst of being in the pig pens, flopping with pigs, that he comes to the realization that he used to have something more. There was something that flashed in his consciousness that said, there's got to be more. And as he's thinking about what should be, he remembers what used to be. And he remembers the relationship that he had with his father. And of course, that beautiful, wonderful story is about this young man who was lost, who comes home to a father who is not looking at him judgmentally like this, but rather with open arms receives him, puts a robe on him, and throws a party. That is the image of returning home. The prophet Jeremiah, he asks the question regarding home. He says, how long will you, my friend, wander before you come home? Home is a place, but more importantly, it's a place built by a person, and his name is God. There are people in your neighborhoods, my friends, people in your workplaces, people at your school, and even in your families or households who are wandering aimlessly through life without that essential sense of who they are, what life's about. They need to come into contact with that person who feels like home. His name is Jesus. Home is the place that is meant to be sponsoring that sense of belonging, that sense of identity, that direction and the building of a self. That's what home is meant to be. So this is the Christmas message that launches our season, whereby we plan to point the way for people to make their way home to God. That's what this is. All of heaven, our ultimate home and destination, is wrapped up in a little baby lying in a manger. God presents us to the place of heaven in the person of a newborn baby. This Christmas, God wants you to live a maximum impact life by pointing people towards their home in Him. Jesus said it well when he said in Mark chapter 16, go everywhere and announce the message of God's good news. Nothing will stoke the fires of your own spirituality and your own faith than being in the middle of life, pointing people towards their Creator. I was reflecting on the potential of every human life recently. And I was thinking about Christmas and being purposeful and planned out regarding Christmas. And I was thinking about the potential that Christmas holds, waking us up as to who Jesus is and why did He come, to the meaning of people's lives, to the greatest gift that could be given, none other than the Son of God, introducing a heavenly perspective into every human soul. And I was thinking about this, and I was reminded of a friend of mine who passed away. His name was Bill, and I have known Bill for a number of years, and in a lot of ways, Bill was your average guy, right? Your everyday guy. Bill wasn't rich, he wasn't poor, he was a financial consultant. He lived well, lived in the suburbs of Calgary. He worked as this financial consultant, and he loved people. He was married, had a family. In many ways, he reminds me of Jesus in the way in which he lived his life. He'd always been so grateful to God as to how he himself was plucked out of the depths of some really bad choices. And God changed his life and transformed it significantly. So here I am. I'm at Bill's funeral a number of years ago. And I was struck by a number of things. First of all, I walked into the funeral home, it was actually a church, but the funeral home was hosting it, and it was packed with hundreds and hundreds of people. And I was amazed. I didn't know he had this much reach. I didn't know he had this much influence or impact. So at that funeral, they did something really unusual. They put microphones at the aisles. They set up a number of microphones at the aisles. And the pastor gets up and he says, this is what we're going to do. If you're going to heaven today, and or if you've been somehow influenced in your relationship with God by way of Bill, then we would like to hear your story. So please feel free during this part of the service to make your way to a mic and share your story. Wow. Well, it wasn't but seconds that the mic had lineups. Every mic had a lineup 10 deep behind it. 10 deep. People wanting to talk about how Bill had impacted their life. That in and of itself was really impacting me, that people were so anxious to share their stories. People started telling story after story after story. And I thought that this was a tremendous lesson to us about how Jesus himself pursues us and how Bill himself exemplified that pursuit. So in the next few minutes, I want to just share with you a few of the stories about Bill and how he lived like Jesus in pursuing people. The first person who got up shared this story about Bill. And Bill had gone into the city, into Calgary. And he was there to do some business. And as he was walking down the street towards the office complex, a homeless person comes up to him and says, do you have some money for some food? And Bill's thinking, I'd like to fill this guy's stomach, but more than that, I would like to see his soul be filled with God's love. So Bill says to this guy by the name of Robert, how about I buy you lunch? So Bill takes him to a restaurant, sits down with him, and gets to know him, and literally spends 3 hours hearing this homeless person's story. The homeless man, Robert, he says, by the time the meal was over, I guess he had shared this with us, by the time the meal was over, Bill invited me out to his home for a big family reunion that he was hosting. I felt a bit awkward in the invitation, he said, but I was so thankful to have it, to be included. So Bill gives Robert the money and says, take the bus out, I will pick you up at the bus station, and I'll see you on Saturday. So the day of the reunion comes. Bill goes down to the bus station to pick up Robert. The bus comes, and the bus goes. Robert doesn't get off. Bill's response was interesting. He wasn't or didn't throw his arms up saying, at least I tried. No. Bill got into his car, left his family and the celebration that was happening at his home, got in his car, drove into downtown Calgary, and began going street to street to street looking for where Robert might be. He couldn't find him in any of what he had learned were his usual places. But he didn't give up. He kept on looking. Finally, he finds Robert asleep on a park bench, drunk, having soiled himself. Bill took him to a nearby gas station, cleaned him up as best he could, and then put him in a car and drove him out to his home and to his family. He fed him a meal, and they celebrated all together as one big family. It was a great day for Robert. He had shared with Bill that he had never experienced anything like this in his entire life. As the day was ending, Bill asked Robert if he'd like to stay over and go to church with him in the morning. Robert agreed. That evening, they talked well into the night about Bill's life. That evening, they talked about how God had come into Bill's life and had saved him. And Robert was taken up with how God had helped Bill and wondered if this could possibly happen for him. As Bill and Robert went to church the next day, the pastor spoke, interestingly enough, on the prodigal son. and how the son had wandered off from home, from where he was meant to be, and how he as a father loved his son, and how the son returned home into the open arms of the loving father and returned to the life that he was meant to live. And as Bill was taking Robert back into the city that afternoon after church, they talked about the story of the prodigal son. And Bill asked Robert if he'd like to return home to the God who loves him. And Robert asked Bill, well, how does this happen? How can I return to God? And Bill explained that Jesus was the baby that we celebrate at Christmas, and that the baby became a man, a teacher, a leader, and that this Jesus was God's son sent into the world to point humanity back to their Creator. Robert was amazed, and he asked Bill if it was possible for him to come home to God. And Bill smiled huge and said, absolutely, Robert. You can find your way home to God the same way we all do, through his son, Jesus. Would you like to pray a prayer that helps you begin this journey home? Robert nodded his head and indicated that he would. So right then and there, Bill led Robert to God through Jesus in prayer. Now the man sharing this story continued by saying this: I think the whole thing regarding Bill and Robert was divinely orchestrated, because it was just a couple weeks after this event that Robert died and went home to be with his Creator. And he says, and now here we are today, celebrating Bill's homecoming. I'm sure they are both talking together today. It was Jesus who said, I have come into this world to seek and to save those who are lost. Bill picked up on that as a life ethic, a way of being. And he did the same. I am in this world to seek and to save the lost. It's beautiful. Bill searching for Robert was him following Jesus' lead. So the first point of the message is we need to be like Jesus, in the sense of we need to be tenacious, like Bill, chasing after people with the very love of God. It was in Ephesians where Paul says, but God is so rich in his mercy, he loved us so much that even though we were spiritually dead or laying on a park bench in our own excrement, even though we were like that, doomed in our sins, he gave us back our lives again when he raised Jesus from the dead. Only by this undeserving favor have we ever been saved. So here's the principle. The principle is everyone can use a little help finding their way home in the midst of their lives. Jesus doesn't want us to give up on the Bills or the Roberts or anyone else that we come into contact with. He wants us to be tenacious in pointing people back to the God who so dearly loves them. Let me take you to a second point that comes out of this funeral that I attended. The second thing I learned at that funeral was that, like Bill, I had the opportunity to meet people's practical needs in the very spirit of Jesus. There was this woman by the name of Mary who stood at the microphone, and she said, I'll tell you my story. I was married for 18 years, had a couple of kids. One day, after 18 years, my husband packed his bags and he moved out. That's the last I've ever seen of him. He just left. I was scared to death. I was depressed. I was hopeless. I needed money to get by. I was a basket case. But I knew this guy, Bill, and I knew his wife, Millie. They kind of rallied around me in the midst of this moment in my life. And they said to me, why don't you come to church with us, Mary? And they brought me to church. And the way they got me there was by simply telling me that it was a helpful place, a hopeful place, a place where you can be inspired, not condemned. So Bill and Millie took me to church, out to lunch, and then they encouraged me some more and said that God had not forgotten me. And as the afternoon came to an end, after church and lunch, we prayed together. And they prayed for me and my situation. And then we hugged. And Bill grabbed my hand. And he shook it so hard. And then they left. And it was seconds after they left that I realized there was something in my hand. In my hand were 5 $100 bills. Bill gave me $500 to meet the most immediate need in my life. I had never experienced such generosity. Jesus says to us, folks, in Matthew 5:16, he says, your light must shine before people so they will see the good things you do and give praise to your Father in heaven. I know on the basis of my own relationship with Bill that he was not a person who sought to draw attention to himself, but in every case, every act of generosity, it was about people understanding how God has been so generous with us. Mary was inspired in her faith. This Christmas season is a perfect time for you and I to extend really practical expressions of Jesus by way of meeting needs. There's an old phrase that I remember when I was 21, our church had as a slogan for a whole year. This was in Seattle, Washington. And the slogan was, find a hurt and heal it. Find a need and fill it. And so we learned as an opulent church, a church with lots of rich people in the Microsoft Valley, we had so much money as a church. And yet there was so much destitution in the outskirts of the city of Seattle. And we were called by God to reach out and to be willing to expend whatever material resources we have for people's hurts being healed and for people's needs being met. This is what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. This is the meaning of Christmas. So there were a number of these stories that came out at the funeral that Bill had a little place in his wallet where he squirreled away money every month so that he would prayerfully consider who he might give it to. He was an incredibly generous guy. I love the Christmas initiative here at the Bridge, where every year we develop these gift baskets that cost between $300 and $400. And we as a church rally around families that are destitute and or needy and or just in a tough spot during a particular period in their life. Or maybe it's just that a gift of love saying, we're thinking about you during this time in your life is particularly meaningful. I know that there are people who attend the Bridge that are here today because they received a Christmas cheer gift basket from us at this time of year. Your generosity has been phenomenal. And I know 55 families are being blessed even over the next few weeks as the care team distributes these resources. This is what God calls us to. This is what we give ourselves to. And it absolutely is what allows for us to authentically and without hypocrisy celebrate Christmas this year. There's a third lesson. I'm going to close with this. The third lesson that I learned from Bill's funeral was this. He made the most out of every opportunity to point people towards God. His business partner gets up, one of the microphones, and he says, Bill was a man who had never had good intentions for the future. He did everything right then and right there. The time to act was now. If someone was in need, help them now. If someone needed Jesus, you tell them about it now. And this came through story after story after story. There was a woman by the name of Maggie who stands up and she said, I was going through some tough financial times. I heard about this guy, Bill, who was a financial consultant. Maybe he could give me some advice. So I called him up, made an appointment, went to his office, waiting for the appointment. I was sitting in the waiting room, and I saw this Christian literature sitting on the table. And I was reading it, and Bill walks out and catches me reading it and says, "Hey, are you a Christ follower?" And I said, "No, I need money." And Bill said, "Oh, we'll take care of the money thing in a minute. Do you know who Jesus is?" And so he begins to tell this woman about the most important person in his life, his best friend, the one who has led him out of the gutter into what he is experiencing by way of life now. It was a profound experience for this woman. And then, of course, he got around to talking to her about her finances and how to manage them in a way that she comes out of the hole that she was in. And I can tell you story after story after story. I have them chronicled here. Colossians 4, Paul says, "Make the most of your chances to tell other people the good news. Be wise in your contacts with them. Every day, pray and ask God to give you an opportunity to share with others what you sometimes so imperceptibly or unconsciously enjoy." This Christmas season, we've got another 3 weeks in front of us, folks. It's 3 weeks today that we'll be gathering together for our Christmas Eve service. Who might you invite? Who would enjoy coming to the kids' Christmas presentation next week? They are always so dynamic. Who might you be able to bless or invite to become a part of your festive table this year? Who? How might you do something different this year and bring the truest meaning of Christmas? And that is Jesus leaving his home in the richness of heaven and becoming poor and presenting himself to a broken humanity. How might your kids see you as parents this year exemplify what it means to leave your comfort and to even leave your warmth and to serve and to give and to somehow sacrifice so that somebody might be touched beautifully with the truth of how much God loves them?